All right. Hey, welcome everyone. Glad you can make the FIMA Connect session today. My name is John Checco. I'm the resident CISO from Proofpoint. I have with me today a special guest, Tony Cruz. I've known Tony for many years. Tony came out of Fort Gordon, Georgia, with the Army Cyber Command. He's worked with me at Bank of America, and he's done a great job. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Checco. Thanks for having me here. So Anthony Cruz, everybody calls me Tony. I am currently serving as Senior Director of Information Security Engineering and Operations at RMS, which has recently been acquired by Moody's Corporation. As Checco referenced, we work together at Bank of America. So following my transition from the military, I went mostly into financial services information security track with a brief stint as a non-enforcement energy cybersecurity auditor for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Yeah, I remember you wrote some papers there, did some great work. And it's funny that the papers you wrote on cybersecurity there are now, they're the center of cybersecurity for the Energy Commission. So it's pretty cool stuff. So today's session is really about ransomware. And what I like to think about is moving our thought process just beyond the actual ransomware incident itself. So I had a question for you. Over the last 18 months, we've seen an increase in ransomware events. Do you have any insight as to why and what's going on there?
So my personal opinion, it's due to just a rise in crime, crime-related events, globally. I think with the shift online following the COVID-19 pandemic and the shift to remote work, right, really increase the attack surface and the amount of vulnerabilities out there to exploit, whether that's a nation state, criminal actors using ransomware for extortion, or even just your junior kiddie scripts that are taking off the shelf uh, uh, code to exploit vulnerable networks. Um, I think at a very high level, that's why it is. Um,
Yeah, and it's funny, in coming from the Energy Commission, right? We saw the Colonial Pipeline issue. And was that an eye opener, you think, for the energy sector?
I think it was. I think it's not that it had not been happening before in terms of attacks against utilities, gas pipelines, regional local energy grids. But I think it just forced the conversation of, we need to do more in order to secure, our critical infrastructure, whether that's financial services, energy, um, supply chains, so on and so forth.
So really, the publicity around Colonial Pipeline actually got people talking, which was, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah, I think it forced the conversation and really forced people to the table and say, okay, you know, maybe we can invest a little bit more in cybersecurity. It can't just be a check the block exercise anymore. And even entities like Moody's are now starting to evaluate and rate companies based on their cyber risk posture, right? And or just their infosec posture. So I think it's something that's coming to the forefront. There's been enough time to kind of just really think about it. Now it's time for action, I think, and people are realizing that.
Yeah, and that's great. How often do you see that, media hype is actually doing something positive in the industry? So that's good.
Yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the pivots I've seen with
Yeah.
threat actors delivering ransomware. We've seen a big push of ransomware as a service, and it's interesting because the builders of the ransomware toolkits are
Mhm.
now leasing them out to threat actors, and we'll talk a little bit later. I think about why is this happening? And I think there's a return on investment there where, there's less liability for the ransomware developers because they're disconnected
Right.
from the actual attack itself.
Right.
And they're basically, they're creating a more commerce or commoditized based model, which is interesting. Uh, the
Yeah.
other the other thing I saw was we've gone from these blanket attacks, these general lures, with the exception of COVID. That's the general lure that's still out there, but having more targeted victims, which means that I find that threat actors have to do a lot more reconnaissance about the operations of specific companies they want to attack, and that's how they try and get more throughput on that. And then the final thing I saw was, we threat actors like to do everything in an automated fashion, try and get as much out there as quickly out there, and they have a 0.5% return on investment. It's good, but I seen them moving away from that and having to do more hands-on attacks, meaning that they have call centers, they have to have human interaction, they have to have multi-step or multi-stage type of attacks before the actual payload. That's a lot of resources for threat actors. I don't know if you've seen the same thing at RMS.
So no, I mean, you see your average attempts, right, to gain access through, a lot of the methodologies, or a lot of the ways that we discussed, right. But it's funny that you say that, because that they're having to get much more involved, because there's a big shift in enterprises, whether big or small, to automate a lot of functions. So what are your thoughts on the paradigm shift there?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think security automation is necessary because it's not just ransomware, but with the multiple different attack methods, and of course, people looking at zero trust or defense in depth, however you want to spin it. The number of sensors or the number of log data that's coming in events that have to be determined whether incidents or innocuous is rising exponentially. So I think our SOC analysts need to have automation to help them wade through the mud and
Yeah,
wade through the noise. So we need a better, what I think, signal to noise ratio,
yeah,
to use a military term, right?
yeah.
To make sure our SOC analysts are being effective. Because I think if there's too much noise, then certain things will get through. So.
Yeah, and what kind of strategies would you recommend? I mean, I have a SOC team, and for example, my focus is, just as I said, automation, automation, automation. Let's out of 100%, out of 100 events, right? Maybe 3 actually really require further attention, right?
Yeah.
Or in-depth investigation. Yeah, what type of strategies do you?
So, I'm a big fan of automation and AI, but I
Yeah.
think automation and AI, they're augmentation tools, right? They're not delivery tools. And when we do an AI-based analysis or an automation, we have to be very specific about what we do. And this, I was going to bring up this point earlier. To me, ransomware is a payload, right? It's the impact. How ransomware gets on your system is a delivery method, and
Yeah.
we have to separate delivery from payload, and treat them differently. So if you're looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework,
Yeah.
right, delivery methods are best suited for prevention, detection, and identification, right? The
Yeah.
NIST first 3 columns. But when we get into the payload areas, I think companies and organizations really need to focus on the detection, the response, and the recovery, because the payload is going to get in eventually, and you'll have to be prepared for that. And I don't think organizations spend enough time on that. Um, I just kind of want to throw this question back at you. From a data perspective, what do you think we could do to help with mitigate ransomware threats?
So my view, and you may not agree with it, whether
We
it's
can agree to
ransomware,
disagree. That's fine.
yeah, whether it's ransomware or a nation state actor, right? They're usually using the same TTPs to gain access to the network. So yes, the impact of the end results of the action on net may be very different, right? A nation state may want to hold an energy company at risk, for example. So it may try to just burrow deep inside the network and observe what's happening, right? And slowly gain access. Whereas ransomware is, hey, I'm going to lock you out of your system until you pay me my money, right? Or whatever it is that I'm demanding as a threat actor. However, the mechanisms for the delivery of each capability is generally the same, right? You have your reconnaissance, right, against your network, against a human target, or a spear phishing campaign, probing network perimeters, right? Looking for those open ports, those misconfigurations in your cloud environments, right? for your boundaries, and boom, you know, privilege escalation, whatever the case may be, actions on objective from there on. My point is that, you know, treating ransomware differently, it's, you know, it has its pluses and its minuses. I guess that depends on the individual organization and what the organization considers its most valued asset.
And that's important, right? If you understand, I'll spin this a little bit. Um, a lot of times you'll see vendors pushing who the threat actor is, right? They'll
Right.
try and do attribution and say, well, this threat actor has these TTPs
Right.
and they're doing these payloads. Well, like you said, TTPs and payloads are like, to me, like a deck of cards. You can mix
Yeah.
and match any ones you want.
Yeah.
But it's really important to understand from a threat actor perspective, and I'm not a big fan of threat actor attribution, but
Right.
the whole idea of knowing your threat actor is knowing what they want from you, right? And like you said, certain threat actors like nation states may want to use you as a jumping point or subvert you, whereas some of the smaller groups really just want the money, right?
Right. Yeah.
So understanding that and understanding how to protect your data is really important.
Right.
Um, I kind of just want to go back to the original question about mitigating, and um, I know everyone talks about zero trust, but
Yeah.
really, zero trust consists of three things to me. Least privilege. That means making sure your credential system can only access what it's supposed to on a functional basis.
Right.
So if a user's DevOps or DevSecOps, they have three different roles, and they should have three different sets of credentials or permissions.
Yeah.
So when and we should also remember that service accounts, those accounts being used by workloads, servers, and applications, are also identities that need to be managed with least privilege.
Right.
I remember going to a mainframe system and seeing every single one of the IDs having global public access because they didn't understand what the entitlements were that were in the application itself. Uh, Segregation of duties. So with DevOps and DevSecOps, right, we have to make sure we need to have segregation of duties that it's almost segregation of duties is almost as bad as elevated privileges. If you
Right.
have elevated privileges, yes, you can do a lot of bad things. But if you don't have segregation of duties, you can submit something and approve it and have it go through, and that's almost as bad as um, elevated privileges. And
Yeah.
then the final part, I think, is we talk about defense in depth,
Yeah.
and traditionally, defense in depth is putting bigger perimeters around your smaller perimeters, right? Building up and going outside. I think zero trust is actually the opposite. We should start looking at our existing security controls and going deeper, right? And going more granular. And that goes back to your data comment saying that let's find out what's most important. Let's put some protections around that or some monitoring around that
Right.
at a granular level, and then figure out what's going on from there. Um, the other thing I wanted to talk about was okay, now response and recovery. What do you think we should be doing from a ransomware incident? And before we got on the call today, you did mention that you were dealing with with a ransomware incident or a potential one. What do you what kind of playbooks do you think you should have, or what kind of playbooks do you think other organizations should have?
Um, so that's a little challenging to really be able to articulate, because it all depends on your capacity and capability, you know, as an organization, as an entity, right? And kind of, you know, a combination of, you know, processes, tools, talent, right? To be able to actively defend or protect against, you know, ransomware. You know, again, I always focus on, hey, you know, what are your most critical assets, right? And what you just said, start building layered defenses around those critical assets. I don't think that I mean, the reality is that no organization is going to ever be able to fully defend against a successful attack, right, or exploitation attempt, right? It's you know,
I totally agree, man.
the focus should be how fast can you mitigate the potential damage,
Yep.
right? And I think that's what zero trust also tries to strike at is, you know, being able to quickly respond, mitigate, control, and, you know, if you happen to lose, you know, access to your network from a ransomware attack, you know, business continuity, right, and disaster recovery. becomes critically important, having plans to do so, right?
Yeah.
You know, in terms of, heavily automated organizations, I learned from you, that I've always been a fan of automation, and you taught me, hey, don't forget about the risk of passing credentials in an automated way across distributed systems, right? Well, when you look at, automation versus, the types of attacks, most attacks always try to gain control of, identities, right? Uh, uh, um, uh, Identity and access management, right?
Yep.
Is
Credentials.
the end
Yeah.
goal, right? Privilege escalation. Right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So it comes to it really comes down to, I think, really understanding your assets, really knowing what your crown jewels are, right? From an organizational standpoint, and being able to reduce and mitigate risk wherever possible.
Yeah, and just to dovetail on your points there, knowing what your assets are, but knowing what you're willing to lose. That's what we call business risk tolerance, right? And that's
Yes.
defined by the organization, by the board, not by the security folks. So understanding from the business perspective how much they're willing to lose or how much data we need to protect. I go back, you mentioned business continuity and disaster recovery. BCDR is a 1980s, 1990s term. I think we need to start bringing that back to the forefront again, right? We need to start taking up terms like recovery point objectives, or RPOs. And RPO is exactly that. How much data are you willing to lose in a business? Can you lose a day's worth of data or an hour's worth of data without adversely impacting your business? And then you talk
Right.
about the other interesting part about business continuity is what we call RTO, return to operations, another 1980s term. And what does return to operations means? It doesn't mean restoring your systems. It means having an
Right.
alternate plan or an alternate playbook to make sure the business can run. So I think again, to your points, making sure what your crown jewels are and making sure you can operate, do your business operations, I think is really important. Um,
Yeah. How do you feel about distributed computing environments, and its ability to provide business continuity and disaster recovery in terms of ransomware attack, right? Where, let's say I'm the threat actor, and you have a cloud computing environment, and I gain access to that environment, and I shut you out of that.
So distributed computing, actually, we used to, in the old days, we used to call it high availability or high
Yeah.
performance computing, right? HPC or HA. And again, new names because of the cloud-based systems. But I'm a big fan of cloud and containerization. Containerization allows me to spin up and transfer workloads to new systems if some get locked out. So big thing is make sure you have copies or versions of your workloads containers where you can it's not all in one cloud, right? Make sure you have a copy somewhere that you can transfer to another cloud instance if you had to. That's really important. Actually, I joke because I always tell people, everyone builds their playbooks. I said, print out a copy of your playbooks, because if you get hit with the ransomware, the electronic playbooks are going to be of no use because you can't access them. Um, so,
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
distributed computing is really important, but you have to do it the right way. You have to make sure you have that resiliency built in, and that you're not locked into a single vendor
Right.
or a single compute platform.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I think we are out of time, but Tony, man, any closing thoughts?
I tell most organizations out there, don't focus or don't be so worried about ending up on the news. If it's your organization that gets hit, I mean, I think that's happening to everybody. I think the best thing that organizational leaders and operators can focus on is, or should focus on, is really, taking some of these principles and applying it to their networks, to the fullest extent possible, depending on how well resourced these organizations are, you are as an organization, and really understanding what your limitations are, right, in terms of again, capabilities, tools, and talent, right. And once you make that assessment as an organizational leader, I think that you're better able to identify those crown jewels and defend and protect those assets.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is something you taught me a long time ago, and it's mission first, right? And that's important, right? So don't worry about the publicity. Let the
Yep.
legal and PR departments deal with that.
Yep.
Worry about getting the systems back in operating condition. So mission
Yep.
first. I love it. Well, thank
Yep.
you so much today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope
Thank
our
you for having
audience
me,
got
Checco.
yeah, I hope our audience got a lot out of this. Thank you.